Let's play with knives. The knife is the first and most essential cooking tool. Its invention changed us forever, and I'm going to tell you how. I think it was James Burke, one of my most venerated heroes, who said that the knife is a mechanical tooth or an artificial tooth. We aren't born with big, substantial teeth like tigers or even beavers. What we do have is big brains that can figure out what a knife can do for us and really amazing hands that can build one. And once we did that, nothing would ever be the same. You see, the human digestive tract is incredibly inefficient. As a mechanical tooth, the knife is an extension of our digestive tract. It reduced the amount of energy we had to put into digesting calories. Our closest cousin, chimpanzees, spend upwards of 5 hours a day chewing, and they have a much longer gut. Since the invention of knives, our guts have become shorter, and we no longer have to spend so much time and energy chewing while, at the same time, we can take in way more calories. Those bonus calories and energy allowed us to grow and use much bigger brains. We used those bigger brains to invent better knives, which enabled us to grow even bigger brains, which enabled us to invent even better knives, leading to bigger brains, to invent better knives, to grow bigger brains, to invent better knives, to grow bigger brains, and the mother of all positive feedback loops that finally led to our becoming the smart, overfed, miraculous specimens we are today, and it couldn't have never happened without the invention of knife. The first knives were invented about 2.5-ish million years ago by our ancestor Homo habilis, who was technically a human species but not yet Homo sapiens, and one of the main differences was that their brains were smaller than ours. This actual knife was actually made by an actual Homo habilis whose name is lost to history, but this anonymous bladesmith was unwittingly participating in that positive feedback loop I just described, which is often referred to as the brain boom. As our ancestors' brains grew bigger, Homo habilis became Homo erectus, who became Homo heidelbergensis, who became Homo sapiens, aka us. Now, from that perspective, you might begin to think of the invention of the knife along with learning to walk upright as the hallmarks that demarcate where we became, people. And even if you don't think of it that way, the knife's role in the ascent of humanity cannot be overstated. It gave us the ability to cut the wood for the fire, carve a fire drill to start the fire, prep the ingredients, get a head start on chewing, and it was the great equalizer that allowed us to not only defend ourselves against animals with huge teeth, but perhaps more importantly, it also gave us access to foods that we would not have otherwise been able to eat. Now, surprisingly, one of those foods was grass. I mean, it's easy to imagine that knives allowed us to kill, skin, gut, and process animal flesh, but grass? How do we need a knife for eating grass? I mean, it doesn't run away, it doesn't fight back, it doesn't need to be skinned, gutted, deboned, or sliced. Can't we just yank it out of the ground with our hand? Well, yes, but gathering it is easy, but grass blades are indigestible to humans. The only way we can get calories from blades of grass is to eat other animals who do digest grass, ruminants. A ruminant is an animal with multiple stomachs, one of which is its rumen, which acts as a big fermentation tank for fibrous things like grass. Cattle, deer, and sheep are all ruminants, all of which are delicious, but you can't eat them unless you have a guess what? A knife. You need a knife to harvest the animal, and then you'll need a knife to cut away the skin, remove the parts you don't want to eat, and then gain access to all that delicious sirloin, chops, and ribeye. So yes, the only way a human can get calories from the leaves of a grass plant is by eating an animal who eats grass, and that generally requires a knife. Now, compared to chimps, our ancestor Australopithecus spent even more time chewing, about 6 hours per day, and like chimps, they had a longer low intestine and colon. But thanks to knives, their descendants, like Homo erectus, were able to make big foods into smaller foods and eat animals who had already done the chewing and much of the digesting for them. A fire sped up the process even more. Cooking loosens up and turbulates the molecular structure of food, breaks things up, and makes them easier to digest, meaning even less chewing and digesting, resulting in increased caloric availability, plus it tastes good, and it supported the brain boom. Knives allowed us to do more with less. Less time chewing and bigger brains gave us time to do, guess what? play with knives. As we evolved, our knives evolved along with us. One of the first improvements was that we started flint knapping our blades, that is, flaking pieces off a piece of stone like this obsidian to reveal an extremely sharp edge. In fact, modern steel knives are still not as sharp as Stone Age-style flint-knapped obsidian. But the advantage is that the steel maintains its sharpness longer and can be resharpened and resharpened and resharpened, unlike an obsidian blade, which is obscenely sharp when it's new, but becomes dull comparatively quickly and then has to be replaced. But when it's new, an obsidian blade is so sharp that modern high-end surgical scalpels still feature obsidian blades. Another early development is that we started making different tools for different tasks. Whereas we once just had knife that did everything, we started diversifying into specialized tools. By adding handles, like you see here in this artisanal replica, we could increase leverage and force and start making cutting tools with specific purposes like spears and axes. Some cutting tools might be designed for working a hide, while others, sadly, we used as weapons against one another. Ironic that one of the side effects of these big brains was that we became very crafty and clever in coming up with smart ways to execute the very stupid act of murder. The next big development was metallurgy, and particularly when we learned that adding tin to copper produced bronze, which was a much better metal than its constituent ingredients. Then we figured out how to work iron and eventually invented steel. By the time of the Middle Ages, pretty much everybody carried a knife with them at all times. If you went to get a bite at an inn or if you were somebody's dinner guest, you weren't provided with cutlery. It was expected that you had your own knife with you. Even nuns used to pack an EDC. So that's the quick history. There's a lot more there, and if you'd like me to do a more in-depth video on knife history, just let me know in the comments. But for now, we're going to fast forward today and talk about what knives you might want in your kitchen, how to use them, and how to take care of them. If you only have one knife, it should be this, a chef's knife. And even if you have a complete set of knives, this is the one you'll use like 80% of the time. This should be the first knife you go to for nearly everything, and all the other knives just fill in the few places where it does fall short. This is your everything knife. A blade length of 6 to 8 inches is good for most home cooks. The second most useful knife in my world is the bread knife. It's hard to use a chef's knife to cut bread without smushing it. The serrated blade of a bread knife allows you to use less pressure, and its length allows for longer strokes. Now, some people like these for fresh tomatoes too, but I personally prefer a good sharp chef's knife. Next on my list is a paring knife, useful for tasks where the size and heft of a chef's knife makes it a little unwieldy and even dangerous, like slicing small fruits, peeling, coring, or delicate cuts like carpaccio. I didn't know how much I needed a boning knife until I got one. As the name suggests, this flexible, pointy, narrow knife is perfect for cutting around bones. It's also good at getting to connective tissue and can be the perfect tool for filleting a fish. A carving knife is designed for slicing through roasts. Whereas a chef knife is thicker and wider, a carving knife is easier to work through a roast without getting bound up or stuck. Vegetable cleavers are useful for chopping large, hard vegetables like sweet potatoes, kohlrabi, and rutabagas. You sometimes see ads for these big, honkin' cleavers that are clearly designed to appeal to guys. I don't really have an opinion on them, but I should mention that most traditional Chinese chefs tend to use a large cleaver for just about everything. Everything as in everything, even surprisingly delicate work. Watching them use these tools always amazes me. A popular knife in a Japanese kitchen is the Santoku, which, like a chef's knife, is a great everything knife, though it's shorter and has a fluted blade that helps food slide off more easily. The flat belly enables you to cut straight through your food without rocking. I used to use a Santoku as my everyday everything knife, and I'll always have a sort of a fondness for them, but these days I get more mileage out of my chef's knife. A European chef's knife has a pointy tip and a rounded belly, which is good for rocking and slicing. Japanese blades also tend to be thinner and lighter, so there's a heft versus fatigue difference here. A heavier knife can be easier to cut with because the weight is working in your favor, but the longer you use it, the more tired your hand might get. Personal preference. Japanese knives are often single bevel, which means one side is flat while the other side is beveled, whereas European knives are usually beveled on both sides. Single bevel knives are amazing at fish because they cut extremely well, but the delicate blade is much easier to damage. They require more skill to sharpen and tend to drift to a side. They're also left or right-handed. Some knives are carbon steel while others are stainless steel, and people really get into the weeds over this, and whatever I say about it, there will be someone with a different perspective. Just bear in mind, this is the very basics. Carbon will patina over time, can rust very easily, needs more maintenance, is easier to sharpen, holds a finer edge, and holds its edge longer. Stainless steel never stains, never rusts, needs less maintenance, is harder to sharpen, and doesn't hold its edge as long. Most home cooks prefer stainless steel, and most professional chefs prefer carbon. As for me, I use stainless, but one of these days... But as for length, a longer blade can do more work per stroke and has a nice heft. A shorter knife, however, can feel more controlled. As I said earlier, an 8-inch chef's knife is probably a good all-arounder and is likely to become your forever everything knife. Parts of the knife: tip, edge, heel, bolster, handle, butt, rivets, spine, and the tang, which is the part of the blade that continues into the handle. A full tang knife means that the blade is all one piece of metal that extends all the way to the end of the handle without becoming narrow. A full tang knife is more durable, has more heft, and is more efficient in the transfer of energy from your hand to the edge. This is a great example of a full tang knife. You can see that the blade is all one piece of metal that extends all the way to the butt and fills the entirety of the handle. This very old steak knife is only a half tang. The two rivets betray the fact that the blade only goes halfway down, and you can also see that it gets narrower inside the handle. I think a comfy handle is important. Wood handles are beautiful but need careful cleaning and can be damaged. I'm partial to the Wüsthof Classic Series handle. It's indestructible, easy to clean, and feels good in the hand. I also like the swell at the butt, but everybody's body is different, so only you can judge. Now, bolsters, on the other hand, are controversial. The ostensible reason for one is that it makes the knife more balanced, stronger, and a little safer. The drawback is that they make it difficult to sharpen that last few millimeters or so at the heel of the blade. But on the other hand, when do you really need those last couple of millimeters in a way that needs to be super sharp? Personally, I've never felt held back by a bolster. I don't really miss that last half a centimeter, so I don't spend a lot of time super sharpening it. I do like a good sharp knife. One indicator of a dull knife is that it leaves juice behind. It also makes like a chomp, chomp, chomp sound when it cuts. The skins of the things it cuts might get shredded, torn, or bruised. This, by the way, is not a sharpener. It's a honing steel. It does not sharpen your knife, but rather preserves your knife's edge. As you use a knife, it gets lots of tiny little invisible bends in the edge. By honing it before and after every use, you'll need to sharpen it less often. And do not do the fancy womp 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 thing you see people doing on TV. Leave that to professional chefs who spend 40+ hours per week in the kitchen. It's not as sexy looking, but the safest way to hone your blade is to hold the honing rod vertically like this and slice carefully at about a 20-degree angle. But if you try to do the fancy showy thing, unless you're really practiced at it, you're more likely to just put more dents in your edge than you started with. Sure, you might think you look cool, but anybody who actually knows what's going on will think you're an idiot. This is a sharpener. There are lots of ways to sharpen a knife, but generally, with a European-style blade, you do a bunch of strokes on one side and then on the other. You should try to keep an even 20 degrees. If you're not sure what that looks like, a lot of good quality sharpening stones come with a little guide like this to help you stay right on the mark. No shame in that. I like the thing more than I expected to. There are more in-depth videos on knife sharpening here on YouTube that you can and should watch, but basically what you're doing is creating a burr on the first side and then sort of knocking it off on the other, which has a similar effect as flint knapping because removing the burr reveals a very sharp edge. If you look at a blade under a microscope, by the way, you'll see that all blades are actually serrated. It's just that the serrations are too small to see with the naked eye. As for honing a serrated knife, it can be done, but it's a bit tedious. You need to hone each little dish one at a time. It's kind of tedious, yeah, but it will extend the life of the edge. I do not recommend these sharpener thingies. I used to use one on this $10 Santoku that I had for years and years, and look what it eventually did to the blade. Resist the temptation to put your good knife on a grinding wheel or to pay someone else to do it. That high speed creates high temperatures, which risks messing with the tempering of the steel. Sometimes it's worth remembering that slow is smooth and smooth is fast. Speaking of the edge, there are some things you can do to protect and extend the life of your edge. I really like these magnetic knife holders. For one, they protect the edge of your knife. For two, you never have to dig around in a drawer with wet hands looking for the right knife because all your cutlery is right there where you can see it and grab things really quickly and safely. They're totally space efficient and they also just look kind of cool. Even high-end butcher blocks can put a little wear on your edge, whereas these do not. The very worst place for your knife is a drawer where it can get banged up. The second worst place for a high-quality knife is a dishwasher. For one, detergents can do a number on your edge. For two, the high heat of some dishwashers can again degrade the tempering of your steel. Just hand wash your good knives. Less expensive knives, whatever, but for my good knives, I really like this thing. I just put a small amount of soap when needed and run it through the brush. It's like a miracle tool. Okay, so now you know how to choose, store, sharpen, and care for your knives. So what about actually, using them? Okay, sure, let's talk about that. The most common mistake people make is how they hold the knife. Once you pay attention to this, you're going to notice the alarming number of TV cooks who get it wrong. Don't wrap your index finger and thumb around the handle. Use them to pinch the blade like this. You'll have so much more control and power, your cuts will be more precise. Once you try this, you'll be loath to go back. The handle is for your other three fingers to provide stability. Don't chop unless you're actually chopping. Pushing down on your food smushes it. Slice through the food. If you're ending up with smushed pieces of food and there's liquid everywhere, it's either because you have a dull knife or you're pushing straight down. Slice through. Try to keep your wrist straight. If you need to cut at an angle, move the food, not your wrist. There will always be exceptions, but as soon as you bend your wrist, you'll have less control and more fatigue. Keep the food and cutting board close to you. If your arms are extended, that's dangerous. Keep square angles and move the food to you, not the other way around. Make sure your cutting board isn't slipping around. Some people put a kitchen towel under the cutting board to hold it in place, and always use a cutting board. I know marble and granite are really durable, and that's great, but that also means more wear and tear on your edge. Personally, I really like these composite cutting boards. Bamboo is cool too, but it's not dishwasher safe and I'm pretty lazy. Try to stabilize the food if you can. When cutting round things, make at least one flat edge if possible so that it doesn't roll around while you're cutting. Know how to cut things efficiently, whether it be by starting with batons or dicing an onion. Always think about ways to make your cuts efficient. As for that onion, there are some tricks you can do to reduce the tears. One is to chill your onion before you cut it. That'll slow down the boohoo compounds a little. Yes, boohoo compounds. The chemical name is synpropanethyl S-oxide, and that is the last time you're going to hear me say that word because just saying it makes me want to cry. Synpropanethyl S-oxide. I lied. Another trick is to use a sharp knife and slice rather than doing straight down vertical cuts because smushing the onion squeezes out the boohoo chemicals. One trick that somewhat reduces the crying is to keep a small dish of plain water nearby. The boohoo compounds will be attracted to it and bond with it, and then they'll stay in the dish. I use this trick and I can say that it definitely reduces, though it doesn't completely eliminate the burning. So lastly, if none of this works and you just can't stand it, yes, goggles work. You can actually buy onion goggles especially for the purpose, though if you just happen to have a pair of old ski goggles lying around, they'll work just fine, so long as you don't mind looking a little silly. One last trick is to just use a food processor or a chopper, but that's a joy thief. I'd much rather cut by hand with a good knife. In fact, if you want to practice some of these techniques, then by all means, go buy some produce and get to chopping. It's totally fun, it's kind of relaxing, it's delicious, it's creative. Now, a footnote on those vertical straight down cuts, sometimes it is actually what you want to do, for instance if you're using a Santoku knife Japanese style. Garlic is another example because bruising and smushing brings out the allicin, which is what gives garlic its flavor. In fact, I almost always smush my garlic, if nothing else, because it makes it easier to peel. So you may not know this, but there is a secret to blazing through a ton of knife work really fast and perfectly, like those chefs you see on TV who have spent countless hours upon countless hours in a professional kitchen doing the same cuts over and over until it's second nature. The trick to doing it just like them is to spend countless hours upon countless hours doing the same cuts over and over until it's second nature. So don't worry about fast. When you put your food in your mouth, you are unlikely to appreciate how quickly you did your knife work. Make it pretty and delicious first. Don't worry about looking like your favorite TV chef. Speaking of, I know all your hero chefs and foodies love to use their blade as a scraper, and that's because they have staff to sharpen their knives for them. Now, if you really love sharpening your knife, then by all means, use it as a scraper. Otherwise, take the 10th of a second needed to flip it around and use the back, or, God forbid, use an actual bench scraper. So there you have it, everything you absolutely need to know about knives. If there are any topics you'd like to know more in detail, just let me know in the comments, but for now, it's time to wrap up this video. Thanks so much for watching. I hope to see you next time. Ciao.